It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our archives are always free at Spreaker.com. I do a live show Friday night, a solo show where I just babble on like an idiot, but people seem to enjoy it. And if you go there and look up Opperman Report, Spreaker, Covert Action, Jeremy Kuzmarov, you'll find our previous interview with Jeremy Kuzmarov. Now, you can find him at jeremykuzmarov.com. He's written a ton of great books, okay, that are right up our alley. Okay, Obama's Unending Wars. Oh, Obama, what a great guy. But Obama's Unending Wars. Modernizing repression, police training, and nation building in the American century. We just had on those guys with Stop Cop City. This is something we should all be concerned about. Check out Jeremy's book on the topic. The Myth of the Addicted Army. I'd love to have you come back and talk about that. Vietnam and the Modern War on Drugs. And the Russians are coming. Again, the first Cold War as tragedy, the second as farce. Jeremy Kuzmarov, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, man, great to have you back. And like I said, anytime you want to come back, I'll have you right back.
Right, yeah, I'd love to discuss the myth of the addicted army sometime.
Oh, yeah. Because I'll tell you, dude, I'm falling for that myth, okay? So straighten me out on that. I'd love to hear what the real story is on that. But remind the audience, who is Jeremy Kuzmarov?
Well, currently I'm the managing editor of Covert Action magazine. I have a background, in working in higher education, and I've researched these kind of gray areas of U.S. foreign policy, and tried to puncture, certain myths that prevail on the dominant media, including with regards to a political figure like Obama, or I guess the saintly image of Obama. And I'm currently working on a book on Bill Clinton, so these kind of liberal heroes, I guess, showing the truth behind them and the hypocrisy and double standard that we see. So, check us out. Covert Action magazine. The magazine focuses on trying to expose covert action and provide critical analysis on U.S. foreign policy. And it was named after a famous CIA whistleblower, Philip Agee, had started the magazine in the late 70s.
Yeah, last time we had you on, we pretty much focused on how just about every presidency has been run by the CIA. So that's what we're going to find in the new Clinton book?
Yes, I believe Clinton was recruited into the CIA when he was a student at Oxford, and this was admitted by Cord Meyer Jr., who was a well-known CIA agent. And Clinton was sent on a secret mission because his roommate at Oxford was Strobe Talbot, who was very high in the State Department when he was president, and came from a very influential family in Ohio, who had connection with his. I believe I have to double check. I think it was his grandfather had been very high in the Pentagon, and he was very well connected in the CIA, probably. And they were sent to smuggle Nikita Khrushchev's memoirs out of Russia, because that was a boon for the CIA, because Khrushchev had denounced Stalin and painted the Soviet Union very negatively, and that's where it started. And then Clinton, the book will go into the cover-up around the Mina drug trafficking operation in the 80s that was part of the Iran-Contra affair, and illicit drug and arms smuggling to Nicaraguan Contras, which took place in Arkansas when Clinton was the governor, and Clinton helped cover that up. So he did services for the agency, and then when he was president, he continued to support. He kind of supported the revitalization of the CIA after the end of the Cold War. When many were saying the CIA should be abolished, and are calling for scaling. Robert McNamara called a peace dividend, but Clinton ended up, expanding the military budgets and promoting all these humanitarian interventions, as they called them. So the book goes into that.
That crime bill, all that kind of stuff. But now, does this explain this smuggling of these memoirs? Does that explain his trip to Moscow? I think for his honeymoon, I think, right?
Yeah, well, no, this was before he was married,
Okay.
before he was a student at Yale. Yeah, because his family was not wealthy, so everybody wondered how he could afford to travel, because he traveled in Eastern Europe and Moscow, and with Strobe Talbot, who we pretty much know was CIA, and Koerdmeyer Jr. though admitted years later that Clinton had been recruited into the CIA, and the CIA paid for that trip. So. We know pretty well that that's when his relationship with the CIA started, and it's alleged that he was an informant on the anti-war movement, the Vietnam anti-war movement, and then we see that relationship pay dividend in the 80s when he supported the Iran-Contra operations from Arkansas as the governor.
Before we get to, because the topic, before we forget, the topic of today's show was the CIA behind the Jonestown Massacre. But real quick, Covert Action Magazine. Tell us about Covert Action Magazine and how important it is.
I think it's an important magazine because it's the only magazine that's really dedicated to exposing the CIA and the corruption of the deep state and providing good, empirical research. I mean, there are a lot of theories out there. We try and provide evidence and facts to verify some of those theories, and also that's focusing on U.S. foreign policy and the political economic dimensions that underlay a lot of U.S. Military and foreign policy interventions and the impact in wide regions across the globe. So there's no single magazine focusing on that. And the magazine was founded in the 70s by Philip Agee, who had served with the CIA in Latin America, and he grew disaffected with the agency's practices. And in fact, he considered it to be a criminal conspiracy that they were carrying out criminal activities in these countries he was operating in, and he witnessed it firsthand, that they were violating the law repeatedly, that they were supporting right-wing coups, they were trampling on democracy in those countries, and they were trying to promote the interests of U.S.-based multinational corporations at the expense of local businesses and the local economy. And he couldn't stomach it. He wrote his memoir, Inside the Company, a CIA diary, and then he was kind of on the run because he started naming names. Of course, the CIA wasn't happy at all that he'd written this tell-all expose and accused them of criminal activity and exposed criminal activity. And he also felt it was important to name the name. He felt that these people were criminals and that they were traitors to the United States. They had betrayed the U.S. Constitution, and they should be called out and held accountable for their crimes. And the CIA had a vendetta against him, and he, was chased. He had to, I think, renounce his passport, and he lived in Europe, but he was chased out of a number of countries, and he ended up moving to Cuba to work in the tourism industry for a period. But he supported this magazine with journalist Lew Wolf, who had worked in the underground press during the Vietnam War era, and it was devoted to exposing CIA operations and exposing. There was a column naming names that outed CIA agents, although it drew on public records and declassified documents. So it wasn't actually like leaking secret information. It was just promoting, what was known and outing CIA agents, many of whom had already been outed. But to expose this to the public. And it broadened over the years to provide a general critical analysis of U.S. foreign policy, which is urgently needed today, given that the U.S. is basically provoking wars with Russia and China at the same time as courting potential nuclear world war, spending close to $1 trillion officially on the military, when there's so many major problems at home that need to be addressed, and yet all that money is going to the military, and we see endless wars and fruitless interventions, and more people I think now are waking up that something has gone terribly awry. But I think our magazine can hopefully help educate people and build a movement for a change in the direction of U.S. policy and government.
Yeah, so people can go to covertactionmagazine.com, and there's several ways you can support. You can donate, you can subscribe, and you can also order hard copies of the back issues. And it's not that expensive. So we invited you back. Well, last time, for some crazy reason, I thought we were going to talk about CIA influence over the presidency and also Jim Jones. I don't know what I was thinking. But you wrote this incredible article in covertactionmagazine.com. Was the CIA behind the Jonestown Massacre? Now, for the younger audience, the kids out there, tell us, what was the Jonestown Massacre and who was Jim Jones?
Okay, well, this was a famous event, and there are a number of movies that still come out on this event, and almost everybody knows the phrase, don't drink the Kool-Aid, because Jones was this, cult leader who he was head of this church called the People's Temple, and it brought together like many from the counterculture, because he started in Indianapolis, but then he moved to California and San Francisco, which was the heart of the hippie movement in the 60s and into the 70s, and the church had been involved in social protests against the Vietnam War, and was supporting civil rights and other progressive causes, and there were it was a very diverse congregation. There were a lot of African Americans, and Jones presented himself as this kind of racial healer who was bringing together the races. And then he established like a colony in Guyana where the church bought some land, and they brought people to Guyana to live in a kind of commune and to cultivate the land and to live, supposedly, live a good life, doing good deeds and stuff like that. But it turned horribly awry when allegedly, he convinced them all to commit mass suicide. But yeah, we can get into there's strong evidence to indicate that official story not really true. That there's some truth. Yes, he was a cult leader and he did manipulate his followers, but many, it appeared, were actually murdered. And beneath the surface, there were a lot of hidden intrigues behind that story that we can get into.
Yeah, and fascinating too, just thinking off the top of my head, that we would have recordings of these last words, drink, my children, that would even exist, that would survive. Such an incredible, chaotic tragedy to this day that it still exists. But give us an idea of Jim Jones and his background, his childhood, growing up. What makes him suspicious?
Okay. Well, he grew up in Indianapolis. His father allegedly was part of the KKK, although that story may have been made up. Because he wanted to present this image of himself as somebody like who came from racist family, and now he was promoting the integration of the races and black rights and stuff. He was a very smart person, and he was very, very charismatic, and he became a preacher in his home state of Indiana and Indianapolis. And he was like mesmerizing as a preacher, and he could allegedly heal the sick, and he would have these rituals on stage, and even bring back claim to have brought back the dead. I think even in a couple cases. And apparently, it was a great spectacle he put on. So he built a huge following for his church. And even from that time in Indianapolis, he was promoting this image of himself as progressive. And he promoted like a communalist philosophy, not communist, but communalism, that people should live together. But he did critique, capitalism, and he situated himself more on the political left. But what was suspicious was that, well, firstly, Indiana and Indianapolis, and this is in the 1950s, was a very conservative city, conservative region of the country in a conservative era. And then he was seen at some communist meetings, but where there were a lot of intelligence agents. So there was suspicion from that time, because of the evidence that emerged of that he may have actually been an undercover intelligence agent or informant. And the CIA will create legends if they have for their agents, a certain public image that may be at odds with reality, and then was especially suspicious that in the early 60s he spent a period in Brazil and then Guyana. And now in Brazil, he lived in a very wealthy neighborhood. He was in Rio de Janeiro and Belo Horizonte, and he lived in very wealthy neighborhoods. So if he was just this kind of humble preacher, why was he in a wealthy neighborhood? And the neighbors saw him, he would be picked up in the morning in a fancy car, and he would carry a briefcase. And his cover, like he was working by day in a laundromat and doing some missionary work and another insurance company. But people